I've got bad news and I've got good news.
Coming later.
The good news is Jeremy's on his way. He's just left the Palestine demonstration. The bad news is he's not going to be talking about poetry. We are changing this session into an election rally to celebrate Jeremy's win in Islington. To celebrate all the votes cast in the election for Palestine, against the Labour Party and for change in our society. So I want to welcome everyone here. We've got a few speakers for you before Jeremy arrives, and the first one of those is someone who stood as an independent in Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough. A month ago, there was no campaign, and in a month's time, our very own Maxine Bowler got 2,500 votes, 9% against the Labour Party. So I want to welcome Maxine to speak to us here today. Maxine Bowler.
Thank you very much, thank you. It's fantastic to be here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Jeremy's got to say, and it's brilliant that he won his seat. But also, just reflecting back on the election night, I mean, I know Lewis talked about his highlight of the evening was seeing Rees Mogg losing his seat. But for me, the best thing about it was he was standing on a podium next to a man wearing a baked bean balaclava. And I thought that said it all really about such a snivelling wretch. In Sheffield we had our own moment as well. People might know Miriam Cates, who's a nasty, right-wing, homophobic racist, and she brought her own little throne to sit on to the hustings, and it was great walking by her and reminding her that the great replacement theory needs to be put in the dustbin of history. And of course she lost her seat, and that was great news. But we know, don't we? We know that defeating the Tories is not enough. We need much, much more than that. And I stood against an MP called Jill Furness, who refused to come and debate the question of Palestine with us, who refused to vote for a ceasefire, who refused to stop the arms to Israel or even vote on that question. And to me, she is complicit in genocide, and that was the reason we stood against her. And I think it's brilliant that Jeremy Corbyn won his seat and thousands of people went to campaign for him. But look at the other votes, 20% for Feinstein, 21.4% for Michael Lavalette, who I understand is on his way. And what about Leona Mohammed, who was within 500 seats of taking Labour's vote where she stood? And for me, I'm really proud to have got 8%, because to be honest, 4.5 weeks ago, I was only just putting putting forward that I would stand, and to come from nothing to get 8% is a real achievement, I tell you. And that achievement is really credit to the people who came out and campaigned for me. And I'll tell you, they were the Corbynistas, the people who were betrayed by Labour. They were the Muslim community who could not stand by and watch a genocide taking place. They were the anti-racists. They were the people who wanted something better than what they were being being offered, and that's what they saw we were standing for, and that's why we got such a big vote in such a short period of time. So I'm incredibly proud of that. Without the movement, we would be nothing. The movement is what matters in the end of the day. And to be honest, the Palestinian movement, I think it's 9 months tomorrow, we've been marching in the biggest, most sustained mass movement that we've seen for many, many years. And that movement is credit to all of the people here. And also I want to say that the anger and disenfranchisement that people feel is enormous. Just look at the turnout. The turnout was so low in this general election. It was the lowest for 20 years. It was almost the lowest ever. 1918 was the lowest turnout ever. And I believe the vote that took place was a vote to get rid of the Tories, not for Starmer. And I want to say that one of the things the campaign did was it invigorated people. I'll just tell you a few stories. One story was we did a massive cavalcade in support of Palestine, and at the end of it a woman drove in behind the cavalcade, got out of a car, made me do an interview on her phone and said, right, I'm going to go out and campaign for your votes in an area that we had nothing at all. And that's because she felt that she had a voice for once. Another bloke who stood at the mosque and said, I am not voting for her, I cannot vote ever again for somebody like that. And they thought I was a Labour Party. I said, no, I'm not the Labour Party. So there's fantastic people around who really want to fight. And I want to really say one final thing really, is the truth is we're all worried about the rise of the far right. To have 5 reform candidates in Parliament is quite worrying. But I'll tell you, out of the rats and the sewers of capitalism can come other things. People who will stand up and fight back. It can go in either direction, and we have to fight for the politics of hope, that actually something better can come out of it than we have at the moment. And I'm hoping that out of this election campaign that we will form a left bloc, a bloc to the left of Starmer, a bloc that will fight for the kind of things that we've always stood for. So let's fight for a better world.
Give it up to Maxine. Thank you, Maxine. For those of you who are just joining us this afternoon, Marxism Festival has been happening since Thursday. We've got hundreds of events over the weekend, and when we picked this date 8 months ago, we had no idea that we'd be meeting on the day where the Tories were given the most historic kicking in their history. Down to 120 seats. Think about who's gone. Liz Truss, out. Jacob Rees-Mogg, out. Grant Shapps, Penny Morgan, got all of them out. And I'm delighted that those 4 are gone. And there's now 5 independent MPs, Jeremy Corbyn, the people in Blackburn and elsewhere. One of the reasons we saw that vote to the left of Labour is because for the last 9 months, up and down the country, millions of people have marched on the streets for Gaza. Millions of people have marched. Students have occupied their campuses like the camp you see at UCL. And it's that movement that has got us to this situation. So I want to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Sophia Beach. She's a Palestine activist. She's an anti-Zionist Jewish socialist, and she's one of the organisers of Marxism Festival. Sophia.
Thank you very much, thanks Lewis. and I welcome everyone. Obviously, I'm not Jeremy Corbyn, but I'm just as excited to be seeing him in a few moments' time with everybody else. Look, I really want to start by extending my huge congratulations to Jeremy. People have talked about their highlights of election night. I won't lie, I'm not as sort of hardy as the people who stayed up all throughout the night. My highlight when I woke up in the morning was to see that Jeremy Corbyn had retained his seat in Islington North. So massive well done to Jeremy Corbyn. And to all of the people who are out canvassing for him day in, day out, many of whom I know are in this crowd, some of them are on the Marxism team as well, so massive well done, because it would have been done without the Palestine movement and the people who wanted to support him. And I think we have to say, as others have said, huge congratulations to people like Maxine, to Michael Lavalette, who'll be here too, and also to Andrew Feinstein. Andrew Feinstein, who took 7,000 votes against Keir Starmer in Holborn and St Pancras in the seat just down the road. And as well, to Liam Mohammed, as Maxine just said, who's 500 votes off of DC in West Streeting, and we do at some point have to make the argument that, you know, if it wasn't for some of the other parties, maybe like the Greens or so on, who stood in that seat, Liam would have won. She would have won that seat if she was the only person for a vote for Gaza and a vote against the rotten Labour Party. So I think it's one of the things that we have to remember. But again, when we talk about the independent candidates, it has been so fantastic that we can have a blow to Starmer before he even starts. You know, if you think about when people talk about the previous landslides that Labour parties have won, or the Blair election in 1997, Starmer is not inheriting the same Britain that Blair did in 97. There is no honeymoon period for Labour, and every single one of you who's just been on that fantastic Palestine demonstration that took the fight to the Labour Party, that said freedom for Palestine, out with the Labour Party, no silence or any second moment of rest for anyone, any government that supports a genocide. And that's the kind of movement, and I'm proud to have been, you know, with people marching on that demonstration. And because as well, when we talk a little bit about Corbyn, I'm happy to see these people in Parliament, but I think what's important about the re-election of someone like Jeremy is that he uses his voice in the House of Parliament to build struggle in the streets. And this is something that we think is incredibly important as socialists, because to be honest, I don't think change happens on the green leather sofas, which I'm happy that Jacob Rees-Mogg isn't lounging across the front of them anymore. Yeah, good riddance, he can do it on his settee at home. But I don't think change happens on those green leather seats. I think change happens when people take to the streets, when people demand for change. Nothing that we've ever won in society has been handed to us on a plate, and that is why when we have people like Corbyn in Parliament, they're the kind of people who can say we need to build the movement on the streets, give the power to the people, give it back to the working class, freedom for Palestine and all the rest of it. And I think as well, when you talk about the independents and the votes that they got, it shows you how much of a lightning rod the question of Gaza is for people in society. I think Palestine, the genocide that we have witnessed for the last 9 months, the some 20,000 missing Palestinian children, 4,000 of which trapped under the rubble, over 50,000 dead, billions of pounds worth of bombs and weapons made here in Britain, sold to the Israeli Zionist regime. Everything about Palestine tells you what is wrong with this world. Israel is not an aberration of the system that we live in. Israel was created by imperialism. Apartheid was made here in Britain with the Balfour Declaration in 1917. It is continued in Britain with the weapons and the arms factories, and it is now continued with people like Keir Starmer who support the genocidal regime in Israel. So shame on him, and we know that Palestine movement isn't going away. It really shows the truth of a rotten system. But I think that we have to take that anger that we see, the anger and the despair and the solidarity that we have for the people of Palestine, and say that we are not just fighting for an end to the genocide in Gaza, but actually we are going to stand up not just for Gaza, but we're going to stand against people like Tommy Robinson, people like Nigel Farage, people like all of those in the Reform Party, because because it is worrying. It's worrying the amount of votes that Reform got. But as we've seen here at Marxism Festival in the votes, the left has a voice too. And our voice is loud, and it can be far, far bigger, and it will drown out the racists if we need to. And that is a kind of united struggle that I think we need to build. One that has Palestine flags alongside Roma flags, alongside trans rights flags, that says we are fighting for every single oppressed person in the world, and we will not let the racists divide us, and we certainly won't let them take or gain any more power in the struggles or in the movement or in the parliament. And I think really that's the kind of point that I want to finish on, because when we talk about what does that movement of the left really look like, it's like people who are here at Marxism Festival, the people who voted for Corbyn, it's the unions who have a big task on their hands now to fight against Starmer. I think what's significant is that despite Starmer getting a landslide in seats, bar the vote that they got in Scotland, Keir Starmer has received less votes than the Labour Party got in 2019. Now look, take of that what you will about the complete farce and the sham that our supposed democracy is meant to be, but actually Starmer's base is narrow and it is weak. And I think lots of people can be mobilised to the left of Starmer to take up it. And actually now's the time for the unions to say we're going to fight the Labour Party from day one. Starmer says that he's going to undo the anti-trade union laws that the Tories put in. Let's see, shall we? We'll be the people to hold him to account on all of those very flimsy promises that he was being elected along. But I think when we talk about the movement that we want to build, that is just a small part of facing up to the big crises that we see in society, and ultimately the crises that are caused by capitalism. And I think that's the final thing to say, because the movement and the time to build it is now. It is an incredibly urgent task that we have on our hands, because the stakes for the kind of world that we want to build, the stakes are incredibly high. We know that the stakes are high for the people of Palestine. We know that the Israelis will continue their genocide because this is the logic of settler colonialism. And that means we will fight until Palestine is free, from the river to the sea. It's not just a slogan, it is a demand. Every part of that land is Palestinian land, and we say return all of it, and so give the right to return to some 8 million Palestinians that there are across the globe. But we also know that the stakes are incredibly high for refugees here in this country and across Europe with the rise of the far right. So that is why the movement that we're building will also say every single refugee, no matter where they are from Ukraine to Palestine, is welcome here in our country. We also know that the stakes are incredibly high for LGBT plus people, particularly members of the trans community. When Keir Starmer rails against them, that's why we're also building a movement that says trans men are men, trans women are women, and if you don't like it, you can clear off. And we know, and finally, it's a time, the stakes are very high for every single one of us, every single member of the working class. So now it's not a time for pessimism or despair, but a time for action. So not only do we need to celebrate those who have won the independence in Parliament, but we need to celebrate the struggle of the streets. And I think that's a time to build revolutionary organisations here as well. So look, thank you everyone for coming to Marxism Festival, and I'll wrap up there.
Give it up to Sophia! Delighted to introduce our next speaker. He's just joined us from the Palestine demonstration, so we'll forgive him for being a little bit late. We talked about the challenges of the independence. Michael Lavalette here in Preston got one of the highest challenges in the country. 20% in Preston, he got 20% of the vote and nearly 9,000 votes as an independent pro-Palestine candidate. Give it up for Michael Lavalette.
Comrades, it's a long time since I've spoken at Marxism. It's a long time since I've spoken at Marxism about elections, especially in Preston. And I thought I'd put all that behind me 10 years ago when I finished being a councillor. But things change. And what changed, of course, was what happened in October. And almost from the first demonstration in October, I had people knocking my door saying, Michael, you've got to stand in the general election. We've got to make sure that we have a challenge to these people whenever that general election comes. And I said, no, my time for that's well over. I'm definitely not going to do that. You need to look for somebody else. And then we got to November and it became no ceasefire, no vote, and I was quite happy for that slogan to be raised and quite happy for us to find a candidate, but still nobody else was coming forward and nobody else was saying it was me. So eventually I said we would do it on condition that we had a hustings, and we had a contested hustings. And in March we had 200 people at a meeting in Preston, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but 194 of them voted for me and 6 voted against. So I was going to be the candidate. So that's where we were in March, and then we were taken by surprise 6 weeks ago. So 6 weeks ago we didn't have a bank account. 6 weeks we didn't have any money. 6 weeks ago all we had was the enthusiasm of the pro-Palestinian movement in Preston. And in Preston it's been remarkable, because I've been down today, but that's the 16th time that I've brought coaches down from Preston, and every single time it's been full, and sometimes it's been more than one coach. Now, for many of you in London, you think, well, what's he shouting about? We've done all the national demonstrations, but, you know, we have to get up and leave at 6:30, we have to get back at 11, and yet time after time after time, people get on coaches and they come down, and it costs us £2,500, but we raise the money and we come. And when we're not in the national demonstrations, we're organising demonstrations in Preston. And Preston is one parliamentary constituency, but our demonstrations are 3,000 and 4,000 strong every time we have them. They are the young, the old, the white, the black, the people from the Muslim community. They are militant, they are shouting for change, and that's what's been the picture, as it has been in all your towns and cities since November. So 6 weeks ago we just had that enthusiasm, and to be honest with you, in Preston it was like fighting 3 elections at once, because in one part there was the abandoned white working class estates, and it was really hard to get votes out in those places because they were sick to death of the politicians, all politicians. And of course, I thought that's a comment on me, everybody's just putting their umbrellas up as if they're pissing in their sun or something. So it was really difficult in those areas, but we didn't face any hostility. We did say to them that we shared their hostility to the political establishment, and we did get a listen to. But to be honest with you, we didn't get a lot of votes, but then neither did Labour, neither did other mainstream parties. Reform did pick some up, we'll come back to that in a minute. And then there was the second area. The second area was full of teachers, skilled workers, hospital workers, people with quite good jobs, professional and skilled working class jobs. They hated Stammer, they hated the local Labour MP, but they hated the Tories more. And again, they were prepared to have a discussion. And when we said, well look, we're going to have a Labour government, you need to have somebody who will go and fight for you in Parliament, we again got a hearing. They were again listening to us, and we again picked up some of those votes. And then the third area was the core of our area. In the Muslim areas of Preston, it was like a rebellion on the streets. Every time I walked out, I've never known anything like it in my life. When I went down the street, taxis were stopping, they were peeping, the people in the taxis were shouting, "Go yourself, Michael, we know it's the 4th of July." When I was walking past the fruit shops would come out, and the people would come out saying, "We know it's the 4th of July, we're doing this for Palestine." We put out a call for canvassers every single day, morning, noon and lunch. We had at least 20 people on the streets of Preston campaigning for a better climate change and no rain in July. It's definitely something that I should have put on my agenda much more highly. So, look, when it came to Thursday, we called it the Preston flood. We asked people to flood to the polling stations. We asked them to phone their friends and make sure their entire communities were out. And in the key areas, we thumped Labour. In Fishwick, in the key areas, we thumped Labour. In Frenchwood, you might not know these places, but in Frenchwood and Deepdale and Fishwick, we beat Labour by over 1,000 votes. This was our core. And then when the results came, it was funny, because we went into the results, and the Labour politicians, the councillors, who I knew before, were coming up and saying, "Oh, nice campaign, Michael, you ran very well." They were utterly confident. But by 2 o'clock in the morning, they'd refused to speak to me anymore. By at 2 o'clock in the morning, if looks could kill, I would have been dead several times over. Because their majority of 12,000 went from 12 to 11 to 10 to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6, and at 5,000 we finished, but we were second. We beat the Tories, we beat the Lib Dems, we beat the Reform. And what had been an incredibly safe Labour state is now a marginal, and it's a marginal to the independence of the Palestine movement. So of course, we are back down today in London marching, and next week we'll be marching in Preston, and we have to stay on the streets. But we stay on the streets and we also build a political campaign, and the next time there are elections we stand and we take the challenge to Labour, because that is more important than ever, because reform are on the horizon, and we have to be the anti-establishment people, we have to be the anti-establishment parties, we have to be the ones that put class arguments forward. Anti-imperialist class arguments win the day. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael. 20% in Preston. Thank you very much, Michael. And I'm very sorry to the people in the rain. It feels like Glastonbury a bit here. I want to return to introduce our next speaker. I want to return to something that Sophia said in her speech. One of the biggest shocks of the election is the new danger of reform and Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage wants us to go down the road of Europe, and he wants to build a hard right party in Britain. It's the first time in the British Parliament we've had a block of hard right MPs. And he wants to do that by using racism, Islamophobia and hatred of migrants. That's why I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, who's the co-convener of Stand Up to Racism, who are organising resistance against Farage. They disrupted his press conference yesterday, and they're mobilising on the streets against Tommy Robinson on the 27th of July. Wayman Bennett.
I want to say I'm very, very proud to be on the platform with people that have stood in elections and defied what's taken place. I'm also very proud to be in the culture tent, which they tried to keep me out of for a long time because I'm an old man. And I know it belongs to the youth, so I'm going to steal it for now, and I'm going to say this. Have you seen Nigel Farage said that his party had a few rotten apples in it? Right? Did you notice that? It's funny how there's over 100 rotten apples of people that are connected to racists and Nazis. It's not the few rotten apples, it's the whole fucking barrel of the reform. It's something that has to be destroyed. And why do we know this? Why do we know this? In 1977, there's going to be a man that stands here. Unfortunately, I was still young enough to be there in 1977. I wish I wasn't. And the person who organised the demonstration was in Wood Green. And I was only a child. And there was a group of people called the National Front. And they used to be the Nazi Front. And at that time, they were the same people who said we weren't racist, we weren't Nazis. It's just that they hated Muslims, they hated Jews, they hated black people, they hated gay and lesbian, they hated everybody. And they said they were going to march in a place called Wood Green. And we organised a demonstration there. I remember turning up with my old fireworks after, it wasn't November the 5th, but we didn't know any better. So we brought our fireworks to put in these pipes, and we went down the street, and the organiser of that demonstration, guess who organised that demo? Jeremy Corbyn. So when people say to you that what matters is only elections, that's not completely the truth. What matters is mobilising working class people onto the streets to say, whose streets do these belong to? Whose streets are they? Our streets! And when the National Front marched down those streets, we gave them fireworks. We introduced them to the reality of black and white unite as dynamite. And we blew them off the street. We blew them off the street. And I remember then, people turning around and saying that's not a good sign to see Nazis running away from one. And I tell you what, we were together 12 years old. We were young people. It was a Labour Party. There were socialists. There were young people. And we beat them. And that's the lesson of history. That if you stand united, you can actually beat them. So Farage has come back again. And then another form came. The next form that came was called the British National Party. Do you remember them? They disbanded in 2013. Who disbanded them? We did. Do you remember Farage got up and said he's the person that disbanded the BNP? He was probably in it. Right there we start with that. We disbanded it by collective action. We stopped them by marching. We also stopped them by culture as well. We had 2 carnivals. And I tell you why, because Nazis can't dance. They've got no culture. They've got no poetry. They've got no history. They do not represent anything that's positive. They represent the most backward element of society in which they want to drag us to. But again, we face a warning. Because at that time, do you know how many votes the BNP got? 1 million votes. It got 2 MEPs. And they used to tell us that it's all about free speech. But I tell you, there's no such thing as free speech for fascist or racist. It only ends in one way. We know that what happens is they speak on those platforms, they speak at the press conferences, and it leads to murder on the street. That's what it led to in the 1970s, in the 1980s, and that's what it led to, again, with the rise of Islamophobia. Because the truth is, there's no such thing as a victimless crime. Ask the Muslim women who've had their hijabs torn off. One of the things that we did was a man called Mohammed Salim. He was an 82-year-old grandfather in Birmingham. And he was going for prayers. He had 22 grandchildren. And he was stabbed through the heart from the back by cowardly Nazis. And they took his life. But the truth is, we turned round and said that movement isn't to build. So when they tell us to be quiet, not to say anything, we are speaking up for the voiceless. And that's why we speak up for the Palestinians. Because they do the other thing, the same thing. When you speak up and say something's wrong, they tell you you're wrong. Do you remember Suella Braverman? Do you remember little Rishi Sunak? Did you know what they did? Remember, they opened the door to these racists. Remember, they opened the door to them. They let them march. Do you remember the question of Tommy Robinson marching against the cenotaph? They said there were 2-stage policing in Britain. I've never seen the police come up to us and go, would you like to march for justice and freedom? Go this way, right? If you want to march for injustice and wrong, I'm going to hit you over the head with a hammer. That's not what happens, is it? They arrested a woman, a teacher, because they said her sign upset Sunak. Do you remember that? But you can come on television. You can have a situation where people from Reform use the P word on film. Did you hear any arrests take place? Did you see them find those people? They've got the evidence, haven't they? Usually, when you say there's been a racist attack, they say, I'm really sorry, there's no evidence. We can't take any further action. There's nothing we can do. There's the evidence. But they don't do anything about that, do they? But the minute you march on the streets and demand that children from Palestine are not burned and not napalmed, they say they can do something. I want to talk about napalm briefly. When I saw the Tories get napalmed on the election, I was happy. Have you seen that film, Apocalypse Now? Where he says, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. That's how I felt when I saw the Tories get burned up and lose all their votes. And I was happy. You know, I was happy to see get burned up, lose trust. And I should have been awake. But you notice something else. You know, there's people who you can't get off television, who you want to strangle. Oh, sorry. I meant metaphorically strangle, just in case. Right? And did you notice she wouldn't go on the stage and acknowledge the democratic... She hid for hours, didn't she? She didn't hide when she destroyed the economy, did she? In fact, she's turned around and said she's justified and she'd like to do more of the same. So I'm glad that she got kicked out. But we also know what they're doing is that they're building the furnace and the hatred for more. And we have a warning. What's the warning? Have a look at France. Have a look at the growth of the National Front and now the RN. We were told at the time when Le Pen was growing that we don't worry about them. They're just clowns. They're going to disappear by themselves. When you go to Auschwitz, there's a warning on there, and it says this: those people that ignore history are doomed to repeat it. That's what it says, and we should heed that warning. Because the generation in 1933, when the Nazis first rose, had no idea what was coming. They didn't know what was coming. We do. And when these people tell us it's just a point of view, and they're speaking up for somebody, if someone says to you, I want to debate with you about GDP and about the growth of Britain, we'll argue the Marxist economics. But if they turn around to you and say, I want to debate your existence, that's not a debate, that's a threat. And if you threaten me, guess what we do back? We fight back. We fight back. We don't give an inch. And we have to understand, when they say they're separate forces, Tommy Robinson and Reform, they say they're all separate, but then they combine, don't they, at the end? And our job is to make sure that they don't combine. So on the 27th, I would like everybody to join me on the greatest party of destroying Tommy Robinson.
Bye-bye, Tommy.
Yeah, bye-bye, Tommy. But do you know the problem I've got? Tommy keeps coming back. How many times do we have to give you a kicking for you to understand that you do not belong? Do you remember an organisation called the EDL?
Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah. They'll be marching through your cities. And then we had to call counter demonstrations until we destroyed them. And then do you remember at the end of it, Tommy decided he wasn't a racist anymore. He said, I'm no longer doing it anymore. What's the most important lesson we've learned from that? Nazis and racists tell lies. They tell lies. And we have to expose them for their lies. But what did we do to the EDL? We destroyed it. And what that tells us is that we can destroy the Reform Party. Now, I'm not arguing they're Nazis. I'm arguing that they're racist populists. No, they're fascist enablers. They're two different groups. Racists and fascist enablers. And that's what they are. They enable the fascists to be able to build. But we do want to destroy them. And then we do need this as a job everywhere that belongs to us all in order to do this. It's difficult here to be the warmer act today, but I know you want me to keep going. Well, I'm going to keep going. Because, you know, by the way, he's never let me say that. There used to be a hook that comes off. Can you shut up and get off, yeah? So those are dangerous words to say to Wayman Bennett, right? So what I want to say to you is that the real question they've done as well is they've blamed the richest people, have blamed the poorest people for the problem that's taking place. They blame refugees. I went to a camp once in Calais, and I saw children and people living in absolute poverty, not many miles from Paris, and they were the people that were being blamed for the crisis. Look at the leaders of Reform. They're multi-millionaires. Actually, multi-millionaires pretending that they're just normal people. I don't know, is there any multi-millionaires here? Because if you've got any money, I'd like it now, and I'd like you to give that money to us so we can build a bigger organisation. But let me tell you about the question of wealth. They said Britain is the 6th richest country in the world. And it's not a question of, what they've done is got one set of the poor to blame the other set of the poor. That's what Emperor Nero said. He used a strategy called divide and rule. And that's what they've always done. If we were to divide up that wealth, it's not a question of a lack of wealth. Right, if I was to take money from the rich and give it to several people, and give them £1 million a month, How long do you think it would take before we got as rich as them? I'm going to take takers here. I want people to guess how many months or how many years it will be. Let's take 3.
700.
7 years, 700 years I've got here. It's 1,300 years it would take us to get as rich as the top 1% of people in this country. It is not the people arriving in boats that are a problem, it's the people arriving in private jets. They're the people to blame. And those are the people that we should hold accountable. And I'll tell you what happens if you let refugees drown, as they did outside Pylos. We destroy our future. We destroy the future for ourselves. I don't know if people know about the vaccine. Sometimes when I speak about the vaccine, I've got all these people that say the disease wasn't real, people didn't die, and there's all these conspiracy theories. Yes, they did. But we got a vaccine. Do you know where we got the vaccine from? We got the vaccine from a refugee doctor who became a trainee inside Germany. So imagine all the people have lost their lives, that had the future, that could have brought that to humanity, that have been thrown away. We have to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And that's the reason why I want people to march on the 27th. And I also want to talk about the power of votes and struggle. When we march, we also have another power. It's true that they add up the votes of 9 million and 11 million, but we've got more power than that. When the EDL was marching in Tower Hamlets, we marched in our thousands. I remember Tommy Robinson saying he was going to get into Tower Hamlets. Did he get into Tower Hamlets? No. Why didn't he get into Tower Hamlets? Because we said, no, Passaran, you shall not pass. Well, there was another reason why he didn't get there. He actually had the numbers. They were on trains. But people from the RMT who were driving those trains went to the stations and stopped the trains and closed the stations. And I tell you now, what that tells you is about working class power. It's not just that we've got the numbers, we've also got the power. So when people say, can we stop the AFD? Can we stop the nationalists? We have to say yes. But there are some problems. People say that we have to, I'm in favour of a united front. I'm in favour of mass action. But I tell you who we can't trust. We can't trust the rich. I don't know if anybody reads a magazine called The Economist. Yeah, it's the magazine of the rich and the powerful. And you know what it said about reform and conservative? It says we have 2 choices about what to do about the far right. It says we can either marry them or murder them.
Murder.
I'm in favour of murder, right? Now, put my hands up, sorry. I mean, I think metaphorically used politically, yeah? Because I've been brought up on this before. So the question comes, why did they say that? They said the best way to protect their money was to have an alliance by allowing the far right and the conservatives to come together in order to build for our future. So anybody who says you can depend upon the rich, the liberal and the powerful, read that magazine. It's a warning to us that you cannot trust the rich and the powerful as a barrier. We have to trust ourselves. We have to use our own strength in order to be able to change things. We also face another question. How do we bring all the movements together? Because when you talk about bringing the movements together, it's very simple. Everybody's attacked individually. You experience the crisis as an individual. But it's like a hand. One hand, some people are trans, women, LGBT, they're young, they're old, they're black, they're white. But when you close your hand, what do you have? You have a fist. And it's always you need a fist in order to organise. And that also takes me to the question that you also need people that think and organise. You need to have... Right. And finally, the words have been taken from my word. I'm going to say that I'm glad to give the stage over to Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've been joined by our special guest, you might have noticed. Jeremy, I believe I promised you a discussion on poetry. We might have some other things to talk about, but we have got the book, which you can get from Bookmark's Bookshop. Look, I'm not going to take up much more time. Before I hand over to Jeremy, I just want to say this. For more than 40 years, Islington North has had an MP who has stood on every picket line, who has stood with the anti-war movement, who has stood with the Palestinian people, and who has stood with every anti-racist campaign. And I'm delighted that on Thursday the people of Islington North chose to re-elect that MP with a massive majority. On behalf of the festival, on behalf of this tent hosted by Bookmark's Bookshop, I want to welcome the newly re-elected MP for Islington North, Jeremy Corbyn.
You just made a totally improper suggestion to me. He said, take as long as you want. A fatal suggestion. You're going to regret that. Comrades, thank you so much for inviting me. Sorry we're running a bit late. We were at the Gaza demonstration, which was marvellous and huge. And then there were a very large number of Middle Eastern and other media wanted interviews about the situation in Gaza and the situation facing the Palestinian people, and I felt it only right to stay and give that message out. And I gave a message to the government about Gaza as well, but I'll come on to that in my speech in a moment. First of all, I know many of you were there and many others, hundreds and maybe thousands of others came. I want to say an enormous thank you to all of you that came and joined in the campaign in Islington North. It was one of those historic election campaigns that 5 weeks ago didn't exist, had absolutely nothing, and we made the decision I'd run as an independent. Then Rishi Sunak made the decision he'd call a general election. He'd obviously been following my phone. And so we were straight into it, and that meant we had a massive campaign on our hands, and we had some brilliant volunteers came along and did a huge amount of computing and technical work to get us ready for the campaign, and then volunteers came in. We only held one indoor event in the whole 5 weeks. All the rest were outdoor rallies, of which we held 8 in different parts of the constituency. Yeah, 8. So we just kept on holding rallies and then sending people out campaigning, and brought in lots of people to speak. Ken Loach, many others came along and spoke at those rallies to invigorate and excite people, because that was a way of ensuring that not only was there the direct message about voting, but also what the campaign was about. And that was important, so it became a political education exercise as well. But I just want to say an enormous thank you to the people of Islington North that voted, all 24,000 of them, because you just think about this, they've had several years of being advised by our national media that the candidate they were being asked to vote for was somehow or other an evil individual who shouldn't be allowed to walk the face of the earth, and that the ideas that we're putting forward were somehow very dangerous, extreme, etc., etc., etc. And so I just admire that the vast majority of people were not listening to that. They were listening to what was being said and the engagement that we were offering to people, and pointing out some quite simple facts, such as taking away child benefit from large families drives children into poverty, and eliminating the 2-child cap on benefits would take 300,000 children out of poverty across the whole country straight away. And also the people that are not in council housing, and frankly not likely to get it because of the shortage of it and the difficulty of building and so on. This isn't a pop at Islington Council, this is a pop at the housing system as a whole, live in the private rented sector where they're spending 50-60% of their take-home pay, and sometimes even more, on just renting a private flat, often not very satisfactory private flat. And so the case for rent controls is an absolutely total one that we have to keep on pushing. And we made all those statements about this, which is, to me, a very, very high priority. So the campaign was rooted in the issues of inequality, poverty and social justice, and also pointed out that we all love our National Health Service. Everybody here, we love our National Health Service. We all use our National Health Service as a health service free at the point of need. But we pointed out that vast amounts of money are being taken out of the National Health Service in private contracts, and 15% on average across the whole of the UK of hospital expenditure goes on paying interest on private finance initiative deals that built the new hospitals, in some cases 20, 30 years ago. And so unless we address the issue of the conveyor belt of public money into private hands via the National Health Service, we are going to continue putting more money into the NHS, which doesn't stay in the NHS. It goes out in contracts and profits and exploitation of people's fears and needs. And I don't know how many of you spend your day listening to commercial radio, but you might have it on in the background when you're doing stuff. There's an endless supply of subliminal adverts preying on your concerns, saying, you know, you wait a long time for the GP, we can fix it. Wait a long time for elective surgery, we can fix it. Just pay 50 quid a week into Bupa, you'll be okay. It's a constant theme of leeching off the NHS on the easy bits of surgery, leaving the NHS to deal with the emergencies and the very expensive, very complicated bits. We're developing into a two-tier health service before our very eyes. And the other things about health, one is the lack of a national care service means that care is too expensive for most people. So what ends up? Mostly women giving up jobs and careers in order to care for people in their family. And so we have a national care service, but unfortunately it's not publicly funded, it's paid for by people out of their own savings, or in some cases selling their own homes and all the rest of it. If the Labour government in 1948 was bold enough to, in the face of all the economic stress they had at that time, to establish a national health service, there's no reason why the incoming government couldn't say, right, we're going to do the same for care in the country as we've done for health altogether. And that would make such a phenomenal difference to people's lives. And the mental health crisis is serious, it's here. Mental health services are seriously underfunded, but there's also mental health is not just a medical condition, it is also a condition that is a creation of the stresses of our society, of low pay, of poverty, of hunger, of reliance on food banks and so much else. And so we have to address all these issues on the basis of how they're going to be resolved. I have to say, in the election campaign, we learnt more and more about the functioning of the private sector within the health service when we discovered that the Labour candidate who was imposed by the Labour Party head office on the constituency actually had benefited very handsomely from private healthcare industry and private healthcare services, and we didn't hesitate to point that out. Some people take money out of the NHS, we put it in through our taxes and our support for it. And so our campaign was one of trying to bring people together and hold the hustings and the debates and all the rest of it. And so it was an intense time of political discussion and education. I'm very proud that we held it in the way that we did. I'm very proud, very, very proud of the result that we achieved. It wasn't my win, it was everybody's victory. We stood up against the media. We stood up against the right. We stood up on the haters and no-hopers and gave people hope and an opportunity for discussion, debate, and doing something unified in the future to change our society. I'm proud of the campaign that we ran. But this is also the issue of how we go as a society. The incoming government, Rachel Reeves as Chancellor, has already basically boxed herself into a very uncomfortable corner by accepting the spending plans the outgoing government had, not raising taxation anywhere for anybody, and then saying that increased expenditure on services will only come through economic growth and the drip effect of increased taxation from increased economic activity. Well, last time I looked, growth was running at less than 1%, quite a lot less than 1%, and very unlikely to get up to even 2 or 3% in the next few years. And so what are we going to do? Just manage and introduce a new form of austerity on people's desperate social needs? Or are we going to do something more radical, like taking the poorest people out of taxation by raising the tax threshold way beyond 12,000 to say 15,000 or more, and at the same time bringing in a new rate of income tax for the top earners, and raise corporate taxation, and bring in a wealth tax which would provide quite a lot of money, which would help to fund these services. I mean, this is hardly revolutionary stuff. This is actually just sensible management of looking at the issues that people face. Because I am personally absolutely fed up with living in a country where I'm told that the most important and successful people are billionaires, and all those that use food banks, well, it's their fault. Well, sorry, I'm meeting people at food banks who work in often 2 jobs, but can't afford to feed themselves or their children, and that's why they're using food banks. And so it is up to us to present those alternatives. But you know, there's one area of government expenditure that isn't under any control whatsoever and under no restrictions whatsoever. I don't know if you noticed it, but the manifestos of Lib Dem, Labour and Conservative all said they would raise defence expenditure to 2.5% of GDP, and the Tories actually want to go even further to 3% of GDP. It's just under 2% at the moment. A huge increase in expenditure on arms, and spending a great deal more money also on a new generation of nuclear weapons and of nuclear power submarines to take those weapons, and the AUKUS Pact with Australia, which provides nuclear powered submarines for Australia. So we're proposing a massive increase in arms expenditure at the same time as holding or controlling expenditure on benefits and on all the social needs, education, housing, health and so on. Well, the priorities are not right to me. You've got to look at the issues there and then look at why they're increasing defence expenditure. Because, they say, the world is a dangerous and insecure place. I agree. It is a dangerous and insecure place. Do you make it safer by pumping weapons into every conflict? Or do you make it safer by looking at the causes of the conflict and how you can bring about peace and how you can bring about things like the end to the occupation? I'll give you, there's plenty of wars I could talk about. There isn't time to talk about them all. But the tragic loss of life in the Sudan that's going on at the moment, massive loss of life that's going on in Sudan. The war that's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is hardly reported anywhere, largely brought about by the greed of mining companies to buy cobalt and coltan, which is often actually mined by child labour in the Congo and exported via Rwanda into the system of Glencore and companies like that. So that is then sold on to make our mobile phones. What's the cause of that war? The cause of that war is the greed to get this coltan and cobalt very cheaply and to fight for it to stop other people getting it. So you have this mineral-driven conflict there. Likewise, the other conflicts going on in the world are often related to that. The one I want to also just talk about, and you would expect me to, and that is the situation facing the Palestinian people. The bombardment of Gaza has already now taken 40,000 lives. Think about that, 40,000 lives in the past 6 months, whilst we have been watching it on our televisions, watching it every day. And those lives that have been taken, half of those are children, already very poor, and many more are now dying from malnourishment, from dehydration, from lack of medicines, from wholly preventable conditions, or dying during operations because there isn't anaesthetic available. I mean, just imagine if you're a doctor or a surgeon and you have to undertake an amputation without anaesthetic, knowing you've got to undertake the amputation, otherwise the patient will die, knowing also that the operation might just kill them through the shock and the stress of it and bring about a fatal heart attack. No doctor should be placed in that position, and within 5-10 kilometres of where this horror show is going on, there's plenty of food, there's plenty of water, plenty of medicines, plenty of anaesthetic, plenty of ambulances. Everything that's needed to sustain a reasonable level of human life is being deliberately, specifically denied to the Palestinian people, who are not only being bombed, but being starved to death and killed by the lack of resources being paid to them. What kind of evil is it that says it's okay to carry on doing that? There has to be a ceasefire now, but we also have to recognise our own, as a country, complicity in this. Yes, most of the weapons do come from the USA. Yes, some are manufactured in Israel, but a considerable amount are actually made in this country as well and delivered there via the RAF base at Akrotiri in Cyprus. And so when they run out of bombs, it's the RAF that ensure more bombs get there. And so when the ICJ made its ruling, and I was there when they made it, concerning genocidal acts, those are the words they used, that makes us complicit. When the International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants, those apply to every country that's a signatory to the Rome Statute for the ICC, including this one. So we are complicit, not just in undermining the UN's demand, we're complicit also in not ensuring that those legal judgments made by the ICJ and the ICC are not being enforced. And so, I said this today, David Lammy, you're the Foreign Secretary, Keir Starmer, you're the Prime Minister, do something about it now and stop the fighting in Gaza. And so, it is about continuing the protest. Now, I, like all of you, feel frustrated, protests all the time. Yeah, you've got to do it. It makes a difference. And people in Gaza, people on the West Bank, people in the refugee camps that I'm in touch with tell me, thank you. It makes a difference to know that there are people in Britain. But this movement in support of the Palestinian people, this movement for peace and justice around the world, actually brings an awful lot of people together. And you look at this, these massive demonstrations, you realise there are people there from every part of the country, indeed every part of the world, who probably have a range of wider political views, I don't know, but probably do. It would be unusual if they didn't. And they're united on a number of simple, basic demands. They want to live in a world of peace. They don't want to see children killed and starved to death. And they don't believe in economic inequality as a way forward for our society. That is a force of people that come together. But, and this is the big but, what you're reading in our papers, if you read papers or read online, and what you're picking up in targeted social media advertising and WhatsApp groups is the most unbelievable bile against refugees and asylum seekers, not just in this country, but across Europe. In the last Parliament, I was a member of the UK delegation to the Council of Europe. That's not an EU institution, that's a pan-European thing, where I was speaking out all the time there in support of refugees and migrants, and linking up with left comrades in Greece, in France and other countries against the rise of the far right. But we have plenty of far right MPs there. The language they use, and the language that's used by our media and accepted by so many others against asylum seekers and refugees, is beyond disgusting. You'd have thought the way people travelling on small boats from Calais are described and treated, you'd have thought there were sort of hundreds of thousands arriving every day, and the Navy had to be sent out there to sort them out, and this is massive. The numbers of people involved would barely fill a football stadium. And I have been to Calais several times, And I spent a lot of time talking to and listening to people that are there in Calais. I talked to a guy who didn't really know all the route he'd taken, because it had been by a series of trucks and buses and lorries and God knows what, and walked and so on. He'd got from somehow or other from Afghanistan to Calais. He was confused, he was poor, he was frightened, he was desperate. And he'd been robbed and beaten, he'd been through the most horrendous journey the whole way. And was then proposing to try and get into one of these small boats to get across to Kent, where hopefully he'd be able to build a new life for himself in this country. Is this man an enemy, or is this man a victim of a war that we spent billions fighting in Afghanistan that has left him in that desperate situation? Wars have consequences, and the language that's used against the asylum seekers is unbelievable and desperate and horrible. So solidarity with people is important. But you look at the activities of the far right in this country, threatening refugee hotels, blaming every hospital shortage, school overcrowding, housing shortage, whatever you name it, they'll blame it, on refugees, when actually it is nothing whatsoever to do with refugees or immigration. It's everything to do with a deeply unequal society that's more interested in giving tax breaks to billionaires than it is to funding hospitals properly. And that is the message we have to put across. But the rise of the far right is serious and present all across Europe. And if you look at the history of countries that have descended into the abyss of the control by the far right, look what happened in Germany in the 1920s, when the social democratic governments failed, when the state basically ceased to function through inflation and so on, and the right offered order, and some people bought into that and ended up being ordered all about by the Nazis, and indeed millions killed as a result of it. Fascists don't necessarily arrive in armoured vehicles wearing pristine uniforms. They can arrive in lots of ways, and they can promote the far right and intolerance and racism by lots of different means. And so the important thing is for us to stand up against the growth of the far right, the violence of the far right, and all that they do, but also recognise that we have to be on the streets doing that campaigning. Tomorrow in France is the second round of the National Assembly elections. The Le Pen far right are going to be the largest party, probably not in a majority, but it has come to something that we have to be fighting against, an openly racist party in France, as indeed you have to be fighting against an openly racist party in this country, led by Nigel Farage and what he's up to, who are going to be present in the next parliament. And so the position has to be that the incoming government here, and whatever government appears in France tomorrow, has to be one that starts delivering on the concerns of people over poverty, of housing, and all the rest of it, and giving hope. Hope is a very, very powerful weapon to young people. Racism is the abyss of hate and horror shows, but giving young people hope and understanding of their own history and the history of the world, and giving them hope that we can achieve something better in our society. So it's up to all of us to work out how we do that. I have just been elected to Parliament again, as you know, and I will be working with my friends, the other 4 independent MPs who were elected. All of us had a common thread of demanding a ceasefire in Gaza in our election literature, and we'll obviously be working with any others who will work with us on those and other causes. But it is also what we do as movements together. I don't want to sort of get into some big debate and argument about the structures of alternative parties, etc., 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 because that will take up a huge amount of time, and maybe it's not the most immediate thing. The most immediate thing is a mobilisation of people around common ideas and common identity and common causes, and that I think we're achieving in our campaigns in support of Palestine. We need to do that as we did during the strikes and the rail industry and other industries. There is a whole commonality of views and ideas that can come together and make a massive political difference. What I've been thinking a lot about this, what we do now we've won this election in my own constituency, we're setting up a local regular open assembly every month, which I will report on what I've been doing, but we'll invite all the other groups to come in as well. ACORN, tenants groups, environment groups, and so on, to deal with local issues that matter to people in their immediate neighbourhood and take that onto the wider stage of the national demands that we make. So this is a time of political flux, but also a time of the most massive political opportunity. And it's also a time to teach each other our own history and understanding, and teach each other where racism comes from the lack of understanding of the history of colonialism, of empire, of slavery, of occupation, and in that teaching a whole lot of new ideas and things develop. But it's also about music and art as well. And as you know, I'm very keen on people developing their own artistic endeavours as well. And so we've produced a poetry book through the Peace and Justice Project, and we've produced that because it's provoked a lot of people in events we've done all around the country to talk about ideas through that, and bringing in a whole new group of people into political activity and political ideas. So never be afraid to think aloud, never be afraid to reach out in art, song, music, science, engineering, and so much else. It's the creativity in the human spirit. We're told that all that matters is making money and being super wealthy, and a real achievement in life is to have all the sort of material goods you could possibly get. To my mind, the real achievement in life is to make sure your neighbour isn't starving, your friends aren't dying unnecessarily, and your money isn't being spent on fighting hopeless and unnecessary wars around the world. And so, the last thing I'd like to say, if I may, because it's great words. After the massacre in Peterloo in Manchester, Percy Shelley was then in Italy, and he was told about it by letter of what had happened, and he was obviously shocked and appalled. And in those days, people could get away with writing long poetry, long poems, and Shelley couldn't half write a long poem. So he wrote this wonderful poem called The Mask of Anarchy. I won't read it all because it's far too long, but what, you'd like me to? You don't mean that. You said go along as you like. What I would, I'll just read, if I may, the last 3 verses of it, because they, I think, mean so much. And although written in the 1820s, you know what? The message at the end applies to all of us. So if it's all right with you, Comrade Chair, I'll read this last part. Is that in order with you? I've got the...
That's fine with me.
So you had his words. And that slaughter to the nation shall steam up like inspiration, eloquent, oracular, a volcano heard afar. And these words shall then become like oppression's thundered doom, ringing through each heart and brain, heard again, again, again. Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few.